An intriguing similarity among the world's great religions, from east to west, is the presence of texts about individuals who identify as spiritual warriors. In most holy books, a spiritual warrior serves as an allegory for the internal struggle that accompanies spiritual awakening. But many people genuinely believe they're engaged in a this-world battle against demons. I've encountered a shocking number of people who think they're Buffy the Vampire Slayer in real life. Seriously. These spiritual warriors feverishly believe they exist in an entirely alternative, often jarring reality, filled with sinister creatures lurking in the shadows. Aspiring demon hunters, these spiritual warriors are convinced it's their cosmic duty to fight against the forces of evil infesting our world. I don't doubt that plenty of humans can see between the veils of dimensions, and it's logical to hypothesize that some realities are more hellish than others. I mean, I wouldn't say our present reality is all ambrosia and kittens. Still, why do humans so quickly go to war even when discussing spirituality? I'm not sure that we should use the language of war when talking about our spiritual journeys. But the idea that we're spiritual warriors keeps us locked into a dualistic worldview. Worse, it makes the idea of good and evil cosmic. It's not merely humans who lack morality. The entire universe is locked into an eternal battle of good versus evil. And of course, good is constantly losing, which is why spiritual warriors think they're necessary. I won't mention the hubris of that thinking. Oops. More importantly, I don't believe war is nature's way. Nature is violent, yes, creation is painful. Ask any mother. But nature's pain is creative, not destructive. In fact, nature is so creative that nothing is ever destroyed, but always transformed. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only converted between different forms. Since all matter is fundamentally energy, and because nature is transformative, even if that transformation is agonizing, then we can presume that any state of being is temporary. We can't be involved in an eternal war with diabolical forces because everything is continuously transforming. So there is no diametric war to wage. Not to mention that if God is constantly warring with an equally powerful evil force, then God really isn't much of a God. For me, spirituality and war are incompatible. While there is an abundance of historical precedent for the concept of spiritual warriors and spiritual warfare, there's also an evident evolution away from that idea and toward an inward inducement to behave differently. Let's just take a little romp through history. Perhaps the earliest reference to spiritual warfare is in Zoroastrianism, which emerged around 1200 BCE. It describes a cosmic struggle between good, Ahura Mazda, and evil, Angra Mainyu. Zoroastrians are expected to be wraith stars, or spiritual warriors who actively engage in this battle here and now in the material world. Now, just 600 years later, we start to see the shift of spiritual warfare from the cosmos to the community and the individual. The Chinese Tao Te Ching, by philosopher Lao Tzu, champions the journey of transcending the ego to embrace a life grounded in authenticity and heartfelt living. Avoiding the language of war, the Taoist principle of meekness is often misunderstood as a sign of weakness. However, Taoism encourages a profound spiritual strength and mastery over one's inner shadow self. That's a concept that psychoanalyst Carl Jung would explore quite deeply in the 20th century. Now, about the same time, 600 BCE or so, and across the border from China in India, Jainism depicted spiritual warriors as those who conquered their inner passions and lust for violence through strict nonviolence and ascetic practices. Ascetic practices involve things like sitting on a bed of nails for days at a time or denying the body any nourishment for days or even months at a time. It's the struggle against desire that's central to the Jain path toward liberation. Jainists honestly can get a little bonkers about asceticism. Buddha spent some time with them, but ultimately rejected their quite extremist methods. A couple hundred years later, in the Indian epic Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita describes Prince Arjuna, a warrior struggling with internal and external moral conflicts, who's instructed in spiritual wisdom by Lord Krishna. This powerful, passionate text explores the paradox of duty and detachment, making it one of the earliest detailed discussions of the struggle that is any spiritual awakening. In Tibetan Buddhism, the term spiritual warrior refers specifically to a person who's confronting ignorance, limiting beliefs, and inner negativity to achieve higher consciousness and awaken to a reality filled with God. Tibetan master Sogyal Rinpoche called spiritual warriors, quote, as someone who, by daring to go beyond their own selfishness, bravely confronts the challenges of life and the difficulties that arise in themselves and others. This path requires an unwavering commitment to personal growth and compassion. The true battle is not against external foes, but within our own hearts, where we must wrestle with fears, anger, and ignorance. Also, the misunderstood Islamic concept of jihad offers a fascinating way to consider our internal conflict against fear and ignorance. Islamic scholars offer a variety of nuanced interpretations of jihad. The greater jihad refers to the profoundly challenging work of overcoming one's inner darkness, those base desires, moral flaws, and shadows of the spirit that we all struggle with. In contrast, the lesser jihad typically involves external challenges, such as defending the faith or fighting against injustice. Neither interpretation suggests any sort of armed conflict. Scholars like Al-Ghazali view the profound journey of greater jihad similarly to Rinpoche's teachings, the essence of the Tao, and the Mahabharata. They all highlight the theme of an inner battle against the ego, which constantly lures us toward worldly desires and distractions. It's fascinating to observe how throughout history, the ego has been repeatedly identified as a significant barrier to spiritual growth. While not as explicit about ego as the holy texts preceding it, the Bible portrays humanity as engaged in a spiritual struggle against sin, temptation, and satanic forces. This war against Satan has inspired some truly compelling storytelling, but it's also hindered our journey toward wholeness with God and one another. Paul tells believers to put on the armor of God in Ephesians. And before that, in Isaiah, he tells an entire nation that God will go to war for them. The Bible has likely fostered more individuals who believe they're battling demons in Hell's Kitchen or fighting a holy war, an abominable concept, than it has nurtured the ability to transcend reality and see the world as Jesus and other spiritual masters did, with a heart so compassionate and a mind so open that they could help other people see anew into a reality where the primary concern of humankind is to care for and nurture each other into a more enlightened way of being. A spiritual journey is challenging and emotional, but I'm not convinced it constitutes a war. The trope of the spiritual warrior obviously has been around for thousands of years, and the world is increasingly warlike, not less. I suspect that this is at least partly due to our continued use of warfare language to discuss spirituality. It conditions us to view everything as some sort of epic conflagration. I mentioned that Buddha ultimately rejected asceticism. That was because he realized our bodies need to be well nourished for spiritual awakening to progress comfortably. If our spiritual journey causes us demonic trauma, I think it's worth reconsidering our approach. Perhaps it's time to let go of the spiritual warrior and imagine instead our awakening as a delicate ballet in which we pirouette in and out of a more enlightened, compassionate, and loving way of being. Let's start calling ourselves spiritual dancers instead of spiritual warriors, because spiritual or not, war is war. Amen. Our question to consider today is the implications of shifting our perspective from spiritual warrior to spiritual dancer, or some other less warlike language. And it's okay. There are no right or wrong answers here. I just want to see what you think about moving maybe to a different type of language, from spiritual warrior to spiritual dancer. Take a couple minutes to think about that. Let's go into breakout rooms for a few moments today as well.